Well, hello there to everyone. Welcome to Regarding Men, where we hold men in high regard. I'm Janice Fiamengo, and I'm joined by Paul Elam and Tom Golden, two of my favorite red pill advocates. And we are talking today about the many messages out there, the many feminist messages telling men that they're not good enough and that they must improve to become feminist compliant in their masculinity. And we're going to talk specifically about an organization that calls itself A Call to Men. Of course, it's not the only one. There's lots of others as well, but A Call to Men caught our attention. It is run by somebody very well-spoken, warm, open-hearted presenting man named Tony Porter. And the motto of A Call to Men is, let me get it right, manhood is respect for women.
Oh.
That's worth talking about, I think. Yeah.
Respect for women.
Respect for women. And, you know, they promote the kinds of subjects that we would expect from a feminist compliant organization. They talk about healthy masculinity, meaning that men put women first. There are talks up there by Tony Porter about how, for instance, domestic violence is on the rise as a result of COVID-19 and the shelter-in-place orders, and he talks about how we need to listen to women, and we need to, men need to check one another, you know, talk to one another if they're acting out in some way. They need to not mind their own business when it comes to violence against women. This is an organization that states directly its focus is stopping violence against women and girls and trans people, says nary a word about violence against men. In its worldview, all violence is violence by men against women, girls, and trans people. It's about getting out of what Tony Porter and others there call the man box, which is the rigid social construction of masculinity in which men are trained to dominate, to engage in, you know, aggressive competition with one another for status, and to objectify and subjugate women. Men are encouraged to become more vulnerable, to talk about their feelings, and indeed to cry. There is a great deal of focus on teaching teaching boys to become more vulnerable, to learn to cry, and so on. So it's exactly what we would expect from this kind of feminist compliant organization. One of the recent posts in relation to COVID-19 talks about the uptake in pornography use and why that is a danger. I read that article thinking that maybe it would have some interesting things to say about pornography addiction, for example, things like that. Not a word about that. The entire focus of the article was on pornography as a danger to women because it allegedly objectifies women, teaches men to be violent, teaches men to see women as less than human, teaches men to see women as existing solely to serve their sexual desires, and that it promotes violence. The claim was made that 88% of pornography involves violence against women, a statistic I found quite extraordinary.
Wow.
Yes, so that's what this organization is about. There's lots to talk about. I have to say that, well, it's a strange experience to listen to the short videos put out by this fellow Tony Porter, who certainly presents as very sincere, very warm. He talks about, you know, they do sessions, they promote speakers. I think they come into workplaces and give presentations. They do video presentations, that kind of thing. And he does these short videos, and he seems very, very sincere. He talks about all the love that is put out during their various presentations and that kind of thing. And yet the entire message is that men are no good, men need to do better. To be
Very
a good
loving
man,
indeed.
yeah, to be a good man is to focus your entire identity and sense of responsibility towards women, and to continually engage in self-criticism, to cry and be vulnerable, and to take credit for nothing good. It's quite extraordinary.
It is. There's an old saying, of course, don't judge a book by its cover. And that, I think that almost always applies. We should not judge people just by appearances or first impressions. But I have to point out, look at the difference in what the implication is in a name like A Call to Men. And you put that against A Voice for Men, An Ear for Men, Men Are Good. Looking at what the real message is here, I have to also point out that this isn't anything different than my father's form of chivalry. It's exactly
Right.
what my father's
Right.
generation would say to young men. You better get in line. You better protect her. You better make sure nothing bad happened to her. I don't care if you hurt yourself in the process. I don't care if you have to sacrifice. You better get in line. This is just an old school chivalrous message, twisted to fit a modern feminist agenda. And while, Janice, I believe your impression is genuine when you talk about him as a very affable, caring sounding person, there's so much hatred woven into their Facebook page. It's absolutely disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
Their whole premise, and I call this the white ribbon model of gender relations.
Yes.
That being a reference to the White Ribbon Australia, the recently bankrupt organization that made, in their day, millions and millions of dollars demonizing men and putting themselves out as supreme white knights on behalf of women. We're the good men. All the other men are the bad men. And our job is to turn those bad men into good men.
Like
so that
us.
women will approve of us and pat us on the head and say we're good little boys. And so we can make some money in the process. This is a ruse. It's a con artist game, and nothing more, really, and nothing less.
You may not be able to judge a book by its cover, but sometimes you can judge a book by its board of directors. And guess who's on the board of directors of this fine organization? Gloria Steinem and Eve Ensler.
Eve
Ensler, the playwright of the Vagina Monologues.
Wow.
That's their board of directors, boys and girls. This is a one-way valve here. This is an organization about women, for and about women. Yeah. This is not about men, So it's a call to men.
Using men.
Yeah, it's a call to men to be more like women. And I've never seen a more colossal misunderstanding of men than I saw on their webpage. It's just time after time after time, they just go against the research that shows that this is bullshit. This stuff is bullshit. Allow men and boys to cry.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you got no idea about precarious manhood. You got no idea about testosterone. Testosterone dries up tears. Precarious manhood says if you cry in public, you're going to drop down like a rock. They don't have a clue about this kind of stuff. And this research has been going on for 10, 15 years. And most people, feminists obviously are pushing the envelope with this. Most people don't read that research. They don't have an idea about it. And this group is certainly a colossal misunderstanding of men. That's a best
and of women too. When you look at this whole edict that basically instructing men to cry openly, let's be honest. Men who openly emote sleep alone. They are rejected by women.
Yes.
The reality that I mean, you can put all the political, gender bullshit out there you want. Guys that weep at movies and crying their popcorn, and every time they have a disappointment in life, tears roll down their cheeks. Those guys are sexually rejected by women. Women
Yes.
do not want what these people are claiming to shape men into being is what women will reject.
Exactly.
In this form, it's nothing more than a giant shit test. So that the cream of the crop, masculinity-wise, can rise to the top in defiance of this stuff. But it's just a shit test from a bunch of women. You're right. This is Eve Ensler speaking. This is Gloria Steinem speaking. Whatever this guy is that runs, these guys are not speaking here. They're nothing more than sock puppets for this female board of directors, instructing men to be weak. And it is what they call in PUA circles a shit test. And it's one guaranteed you should fail if you ever not want to sleep alone.
It's a very contradictory message, certainly, because on the one hand, it's all about that trope of vulnerability, talking about your feelings, showing your feelings, don't be afraid to cry. Let's mold boys in this way, make them into little girls. And yet at the same time, men are supposed to perform acts of incredible heroism by constantly putting themselves in danger to rescue women from other men. So I don't know how they expect that men can be both those things, but it's certainly a recipe for schizophrenia at the very least, if not for getting into a lot of, very serious fights with other men, and even perhaps situations where one's life is at risk. And yeah, it's scary to see the level of denial of basic realities, the basic reality there is anything biological about how men are in the world. This is, again, completely social constructionist kind of approach.
Yes.
The denial that women play any role at all in shaping how men are and how men respond and behave. And the denial that there are social structures that shape men's lives and that inhibit men and create problems for men. None of that is talked about in this website at all. Everything is, if there are problems, there's one short video that Tony Porter did where he talks about how more men are dying from the coronavirus. And that becomes a conversation entirely about men being at fault. Men not looking after themselves, men being too masculine to go to the doctor, men not disclosing their medical history, men drinking too much, all sorts of things like that. So wherever there is any acknowledgement of men's problems or challenges, that's men's fault. And in every other way, men are the problem. And the thing that really made me realize that there's something deeply dishonest, not just misguided, but dishonest about the site, was that there are actually some voices of dissent on the Facebook page. I don't know if you saw these. There's at the top of the Facebook page.
One of them.
Did you really? The
Yes,
best one, I bet. Oh, okay. Because I was going to read that one out. Where did it go now? I've lost it.
Yeah, guy Echo Foxtrot has been putting pro-male messages on there, and no one responds to them.
Yeah, that's it. And they are responses that draw on studies about domestic violence. They talk about the basic fact that, okay, it's all very well to say, let's respect women, whatever that means. Why would you give respect to an entire sex for nothing? And yet are women being encouraged to respect men? These are the kinds of criticisms that are being made right on the Facebook page. And I do have to give it to the organization that those comments have not yet been taken down.
Right.
They haven't noticed yet.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
That could well be.
But kudos to Paul and to Echo Foxtrot
for putting those up. But the fact that they have not been responded to, I mean, what does that mean? Because other comments are responded to. You get, people writing in and saying, I'm now realizing that my mission in life is to do more childcare because my wife can't do it all. So I'm stepping up now during this period of crisis. I'm doing more housework. I'm, and those get commented on.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Good for you.
Yeah, good for you. Thanks for sharing.
You're a real man.
Yeah. So the fact that the criticisms just sit there without any response at all,
good point.
Tells me something about that organization, and it's an inability or unwillingness or indifference to responding to the reality of men's experience. And that's the thing too, all this stuff about men open up, be vulnerable, talk about what a contradictory message, because we know that if men actually speak honestly about what's going on in their lives, some pretty serious things that are happening to men, what's going to be the response?
Oh, absolute and total rejection. This is
man
not,
up.
and I would really want to say this just flat out. All this thing about talk about your feelings is utter and complete lies and bullshit. They do not want you to talk about your feelings. They want you to say what they want you to say and
Exactly.
nothing else. And the moment you talk about your real lived experience as a man, they will begin the shaming process and tell you you have privilege and that you should be silent. This is the MO of all feminists. And by the way, if there's any firefighters out there, please go to their page and talk and say that now you have a commitment to talk about your fears as you're running into a burning building. And fulfill their insane agenda.
And that's number 2 on their box list. It reads, allow men and boys to be and act afraid.
Yeah. Wow.
Be and act afraid, guys.
Yeah, that'll really improve your status in the world.
What they do not tell you is that testosterone lowers fear.
And increases risk-taking, which is what makes men so valuable to society and to civilization. It is critically important, and they're going at the very core of what makes men valuable. And let me be clear, because I can imagine that, one of these clowns would be listening to this conversation. Oh yeah, typical patriarchal stuff. You want to shut down little boys' emotions. You want to force them into boxes so they act like men, and that's what we're working against. And that's bullshit too. Men have high emotional acumen. They have mastery of their feelings. They have to. In order to get by in the world as men, you have to take control of your feelings. Guess what, guys? That's a healthy thing. Being in control of your feelings and letting your intellect rule over your emotions is a 24-karat gold example of mental health.
Yes.
And these guys are arguing against that.
Yes. Yeah, it's a sign of maturity, someone who can be able to look at things clearly and not let the emotions, throw them off.
Yeah, it's one of the fundamental ingredients of any functioning community is people who have the ability to restrain their emotions.
Yes. And men generally do not have PMS.
No.
At least the last time I checked.
Well, I tell you what, that's what I used to believe until I hit that Facebook page.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure anymore.
Number 3, Paul. I got to get to number 3. Never use power, control, or violence. Never use power, control, or violence. That's crazy.
Yeah.
How are you going to get through your life if you don't use power or control in some way? Hopefully, use power control for good rather than for evil.
Well, yeah, and if you're buying these guys' message about what you should be to women, which is to run to their defense every time they're threatened with anything, if you're not using power in that, you're just, giving a person to run over before they get to harm the woman. It just doesn't make sense. These are not thought out philosophies because they have not exercised emotion over intellect.
Yes, that's
gynocentrism in action. It's mindless, it's unhelpful, it's intemperate, it's everything you could possibly imagine in the emotional realm.
Oh God.
It's all about getting a pat on the head, and making a few dollars in the process. This is all this is about. It's all it's ever been about. Michael Kimmel, Chris Kilmartin, you go back and you find all these guys from Division 51, from other, NOMAS, AMSA, other men's feminist organizations, and you find the same crowd every time crowing about and virtue signaling about how great their version of masculinity is and how bad every other man is. Mm-hmm. And they're the ones, and by the way, we got a donation button. Can you hit us up a few bucks? Boom. Mm-hmm. This is all this is. And the guys doing it in a call to men, they may not be aware fully, because gynocentrism is very powerful in men. The urge to protect women, and we can feel really, really self-righteous about it. Yes. And that's an unfortunate trait in men. But don't be fooled, guys. This is all this is. There's nothing else to it. You can move along. There's nothing there to see. And fortunately, I think that we've changed the narrative enough in the past few years that this is getting exposed. White Ribbon Foundation went under.
Yes, and one of the most striking things about all this is that it never says one thing about what the man needs.
Never.
Not one mention of anything that he needs. And that's what we, as the red pill stuff says, you've got to help men focus on that, what they need, because they've had this list of bullshit, for their whole lives, and people reinforcing it, both men and women. And suddenly the red pill says, you know what, you got needs, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you build your identity on thinking that only the needs of the other sex matters, and that your entire healthy masculinity has to flow from putting women first and only thinking about women, what a disaster in the making. Especially when, in some ideal world, the notion of respecting women and caring for women and all, sacrificing for women even, well, if women were also being taught to care for men and to think about their needs and to respect men and value them and everything. Well, in many ways that would be the ideal situation, but that's the opposite of what's happening. And so this notion that men are not allowed to have legitimate needs except crying, with other men over their inadequacies or their inability to feel authentically or some nonsense. This notion is so damaging. And I guess that the positive thing is that it's getting more and more difficult for these various organizations to peddle this nonsense. But I see them all over the place. One fails like White Ribbon, but there's all sorts of others that spring up doing exactly the same thing.
Like a call to men.
Yeah, a call to men. There's an organization called Man Up Against Violence, which is essentially a clone of a call to men, the same kind of rhetoric. They're going after younger and younger boys. There's an organization called Next Gen Men, which specifically targets boys in grades 7 and 8. To talk to them about these very things, respecting women.
Re-engineering.
Yeah, it's just incredible, telling them all about the dangers of objectification and rape culture and, how they should be ashamed of being interested in girls sexually and looking at pornography or whatever. They start in on the shaming so young. They target very, very vulnerable boys and young men. There's an organization called Children of the Street, I think, which started off as it's a Vancouver-based organization, maybe across Canada too, started off as an organization to help street kids. And now it's got into the toxic masculinity business too. There are posters up all over Vancouver saying toxic stops here, with pictures of young men of 14 and 15, standing with their arms folded as if they're somehow responsible for bearing the burden of toxic masculinity and putting an end to it. And the complete inability to recognize that men too are abused. The kids on the street are there because they've been abused, often by their mothers or by female figures in their lives, teachers, etc. And not a word uttered about any of that. And yet all this focus on locker room talk and how bad that is, because it objectifies women, and how you have to scrutinize your own desires, your own physical urges, etc., and feel bad about them and carry the shame of your masculinity. It's, you know, it's really disturbing, obviously. And I would expect that it, you know, obviously with some men, it will have the opposite of its supposed intention. It is going to produce some deep and justified anger and resentment, and indeed even acting out.
Yes.
Hatred. They're engendering hatred in people who are already in many ways marginalized and disenfranchised out of the whole social discussion. I find it laughable that they talk about masculinity being defined as respect for women. And it's one of the things I love about Red Pill. First, masculinity, femininity, human nature, and human character, I think, can be defined by self-respect first. That encompasses respect for others. When it comes to women as a class, I do not respect anybody as a class.
Why? Why would you? Exactly.
It's an individual assessment, which is what, if you listen to feminists crow about what feminism means, look it up in the dictionary, they say it's about equality. Well, guess what? Assessing individuals on their own merits is about equality. That's exactly the very definition of it. And what you see in places like A Call to Men and others is the very opposite of the stated goal of equality. They're telling you to presume goodness and all good things about one class of people, and to bigoted fashion assume the negative about the other. Yep. It is hypocrisy at its most stinking obvious. Just absolutely mind-blowing. And I'm sure that these guys, I'm guessing, if they're, you know, getting some attention from women that's positive for this, that they're just waddling through all this stuff just as happy as ducks in water, and couldn't be more pleased with themselves for all this bigotry and hatefulness that they're preaching.
Yep, it's a crazy place. You know, I was reading through their website, and I kept seeing these references to research over and over again. I thought, what the hell? What research are they talking about? Because I wanted to look this stuff up and see what they were talking about, right? So I kept reading, and finally, I came to a page that explained everything. They started singing the praises of the APA Division 51's boys and men. You know, their what is it called? Not outline, but their
guidelines,
recommendations
for psychological
for treatment of boys
practice.
And men. And so it's division, and then they started listing the research that they had talked about before. It was all these guys from Division 51.
What is Division 51 for anybody who doesn't know? Because I don't know.
Division 51 is a division of the American Psychological Association. It's supposed to be for men and boys. But it turns out it's more like A Call to Men. You know, if you look at
their subtitle is the Society for the Psychological Study of Men and Masculinity.
Thank you. But it's quite a group. I've had some experience with them, and I could now see why they were quoting this research, because the research has been done. And this is what Jordan Peterson said when he critiqued that whole recommendation for boys and men from the Division 51 people. He said, look, these people are simply reciting their own research over and over and over again. They don't go outside to look at any alternate views. They only look at their own stuff. And that's what we see here from the research for A Call to Men.
And how typical of that is of feminism in general.
Yeah.
It is very definitely a best example I've ever seen of an echo chamber.
Yes. Yeah. Confirmation bias on steroids.
Yeah, the feminists took over the academic journals. They got into even journals that had once been real research journals. And that made it possible for them to put a veneer of scientific objectivity on all sorts of things that even a duffer like me can look at and see are just fantasy and wish fulfillment and crass generalizations and bigotry masquerading as some kind of serious research.
Correct.
Yeah. Sad stuff. Sad stuff. Yeah. So in opposition to A Call to Men, we affirm that
Men
are
good.
good. Indeed they are. Does that mean we're finished?
I don't know. I tell you, I really, as much as I've had fun poking holes, it is like shooting fish in a barrel, honestly.
Yeah.
I really wish for the day to come that people who are of this mindset that we must ridicule and shame all men and we must elevate and pedestalize all women. I really hope the day comes someday that people recognize that for the bigotry that it is.
Me too.
It is bigotry.
Yeah,
So
amen.
true.
And with that, I guess we will
Okay.
say
Yeah.
we've enjoyed again. Thank you all for your support. We almost had a happy ending there. We a little glimmer of light at the end there.
Yeah, there's a bit of light.
Oh, good old happy
Two
endings.
more happy endings, and we're a massage parlor.
Have a great week.
Oh, jeez.
Take
We'll see
care,
you then.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Take care.